And thank you very much for showing so much interest in our event here. My name is Martin Hiller. I'm the Director General of REEEP, and I have a very nice role to play here. I'm the moderator of this session, and I have a nice role because I have a very great panel with me here. From my very right, we have Ari Huhtala, who is the Deputy CEO of responsible for policy and programs at CDKN, the Climate Development Knowledge Network in the UK. The lady right to my right is Syamsida Tamrin. She is the Deputy Director for Weather and Climate in the Ministry of National Development Planning in the government of Indonesia. Thank you, Syamsida. To my immediate left is Peter Story, who is the CEO and Global Coordinator of the Private Financing Advisory Network, also known under his acronym of PFAN. We're all fans of PFAN. And to his right is Mark Fogarty, who owns and runs an investment company, First Energy Asia, out of Sydney, and is a long-standing governing board member of REEEP. Since I'm the moderator of the session, I'm not allowed to take a side for a specific organization, so Mark will take over for that. Our program here looks at the question of, and I should have of course done this, but now you have to hold this in front of you. Our program here looks at small and medium enterprise climate finance and the link and the basis for this financing within NDCs. This is a hugely important subject simply because small and medium enterprises present the majority of economic activity in any country, actually in any place of the world. They are also the means to get prosperity into levels where prosperity is really needed, but they're of course fiendishly difficult to finance because there are many and they're small. And so we need to find ways how to do that, and everybody on this panel here is not only thinking about how to do that, but actively working in that direction. And I hope many of you are doing the same, and we'll have a bit of an interaction, see where we're going with this. The program now is the following. I will ask Ari Huhtala to give us some remarks about 8 or 10 minutes about CDKN's work to support NDC planning. And then I will ask Syamsida Tamrin to inform us about the Indonesian NDC with a special focus on SME activity. And actually that gives us the platform for the discussion. We'll then go to Peter Story and to Mark Fogarty to see what both gentlemen, who both come out of a financing background, actually make out of that. So how could actually PFAN and how could REEEP help Indonesia in this endeavor to bring more financing into the SME sector in Indonesia? That's the discussion, and that is a discussion that I will then open up to all of us. I say already now that discussions should be short, questions should be asked out of the audience, short and succinct, and we'll try to also be short and succinct on the panel so we get a bit more interaction here. Now, may I first ask Ari to help to give his presentation, and I will probably need a lot of help now. Okay, well, that's already something. Let's see. I mean, I do use these things from time to time. So. Yeah.
Yeah. Good morning. It seems to work. Pleasure to be here. The topic is how the role of an SME, small and medium enterprises, in actually implementing NDCs, and particularly what the financing challenges are. I wanted to start just with a very general general remark about the importance of the private sector, because I think that's kind of the spirit today. I mean, it is the main energy user and the greenhouse gas producer, and therefore, in fact, NDC implementation will be completely impossible without a very active engagement by the private sector. Future private sector climate funders expenditure might need to reach, it says here, $500 billion annually or beyond to keep the Earth on the 2 degrees emissions path. And of course, we all desire that target to be lower than 1.5. So the private sector is extremely well positioned to drive mitigation and adaptation activities because it has the incentive and capacity to develop new technologies faster, more efficiently, and at a lower cost than the public sector. And it has stronger connection with consumers than the public sector, so is better positioned to provide climate mitigation and adaptation technologies to low-income populations. Just a very general statement. And then, of course, the role of the micro, small, and medium enterprises. Just a little bit of figures. In many developing countries, the MSME group actually accounts for the bulk of employment in the productive sector and the businesses, and 90% of companies. So here we have interesting statistics that actually it's micro companies and small companies that actually run most of the business. Greening SMSs, these companies will therefore be vital for moving the private sector to a low carbon trajectory. We should not forget them. They also provide essential climate technologies that have significant potential to drive mitigation and adaptation across the economy. And due to their own local networks, these enterprises are uniquely positioned to deliver climate technologies to the bottom of the pyramid and increase the climate resilience of the poorest population. And somebody has made an attempt to calculate kind of the finance gap, climate finance gap in the SMS, in the micro, small, and medium enterprise community. The available data of these gaps suggests that the overall climate finance gap for them will be in the magnitude of billions and billions of dollars. So this is not small fry. It's really important to address the issues of the small and medium enterprises and their role in addressing climate challenges. CDKN has been active in many ways, but today my main point is about the work we've been doing with our partner Ricardo Energy and Environment on launching the NDC implementation quick start guide and reference manual. This is the NDC implementation framework that is provided in that manual. SMEs don't figure only in the finance or in the mitigation and adaptation boxes. I see a very important role also for them in when we discuss governance. Are SMEs actually heard in the process of creating an enabling environment for a trajectory towards climate compatible investments? And also SMEs can be extremely important innovators. And we have seen good examples in countries that have established, for instance, the Climate Innovation Centers, CICs, that incubates indigenous SMEs to be very innovative and proactive in going into low carbon and climate resilient technology development and dissemination in developing countries. So here is a graph of the implementation framework, where SMEs are often underrepresented. The Quick Start Guide was launched last week, and there are many events in this COP to actually describe it. Some have already been held, and another one, which I will refer to soon, will be held tomorrow morning. The guide looks like this, and it's also available on a very practical online version, so you don't have to carry this thick volume, and we try to be paperless and environmentally sound, but there is also a hard copy available for those who find it difficult to access good online connections. But this Quick Start Guide is a practical tool that can help countries to frame and develop their NDC implementation plans. It's developed with partners, and it has now been launched, and we are piloting it in countries like Kenya. It responds to identified needs for early practical guidance on how to prepare effective NDC implementations and how to actually take action. It builds on the guidance and produced pre-Paris to support INDC development, and the picture there is actually the cover page of the INDC development guide, not the actual implementation guide. It's focused on supporting developing countries, but could be applied globally, and it recognizes that countries are at very different stages. Some are really well equipped to start going ahead, some are not. It's produced as a guide, and it is accompanied by a reference manual. The Quick Start Guide provides a framework to actually structure NDC implementation around 3 steps. And it's very important to remember most NDCs are not investment plans. They are aspirations, they are objectives, they are targets, but to convert them to investment plans is a tremendous challenge in many countries. You need to sort of link them with existing climate and development plans, and that is often very challenging, and also with the existing SDG framework, which is another important international framework to follow. So it starts with preparatory work. It goes then to developing an NDC implementation plan, which includes a gap analysis, resource needs, sequencing of activities, and documenting the plan, and then what you actually do to deliver the NDC. Coordinating climate actions between various stakeholders, build capacity so that this, even if there's external support, that support will not be a one-off, but would actually leave behind solid capacity to continue doing this through national, indigenous, local resources and capacity, and then stakeholder engagement. I had a conversation with someone yesterday again who said the INDC was prepared as desk work in a ministry. There was no engagement with the stakeholder groups. Who owns the INDC? Now the NDC is there. Is it actually something that speaks to line ministries, sectoral ministries, and the private sector? Do they actually agree to the goals that are there? In some other countries, the engagement was very organized, very strong, and therefore the INDC implementation is apparently going to be a lot easier because there was so much dialogue before the final document and final target was agreed to. The guide frames that implementation plan. It sets out the process and the steps, and it gives kind of an overall framework of what not to forget. But what is really then interesting is the reference manual that outlines the key steps per sector. Each module, and there are modules on adaptation, finance, governance, mitigation, and monitoring and reporting and verification, MRV. And each module includes introduction to the module and its key issues, shows the main activities covered, short explanation on the context of the Paris Agreement, a table of very detailed, quite a detailed table of activities, including the gap analysis, and then number of lessons and examples of best practice from some countries where things have already happened. So it's in that sense a very practical module. And as I said, SMEs are not relevant only to the finance module here. I would say there is a good case for kind of having a magnifying glass in each one of the modules and see how SMEs could specifically be addressed in implementing the steps outlined in this guide and reference manual. There are examples of gap analysis in climate finance. So here we have actually steps that need to be taken: track financial flows, engage private sector, develop project pipeline, secure direct access access financing options, identify funding needs, prioritize activities, and climate finance governance. And then a lot of kind of bullets and things to be considered, activities for each of these elements, and whether they are already under control, whether they are already complete, whether the country has made no progress, or whether some progress has already been made. So this kind of provides a very useful checklist for the implementers to see that no important step is left out. And tomorrow we will be giving another more detailed presentation on planning for NDC implementation in the green zone at from 9 to 10:30, so it's a very early one, with the examples from Bangladesh, Kenya, and Uganda. It's in the Moloya room, which you will not remember now that I say it, but I will leave invitations here on a chair, so after this event, you're most welcome to pick them up. The guide can be accessed very easily, the online version, on CDKN's website, just going there and then /NDC-guide, or put NDC guide just in the search engine and you'll find it over there. So this is just really to give a little bit of a flavor of what we think needs to be considered when you talk about implementing NDCs and how SMEs are vital in that process. But now let us hear what Indonesia has in mind, how you actually plan to do it in practice and what your challenges are. Thank you.
Thank you, Ari. Syamsida, please, can I ask you to the podium? And I need to become technology. Just need to fight with the technology again. So it's very interesting. So, it seems. That's a thrilling moment. Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. So I will sharing with you what we are like preparing basically to achieve our NDC target with approach through the small, medium enterprise, especially focused on energy sector. So I would like starting from our midterm development plan. Already there, we mentioned that our development should be inclusive and sustainable in growth, in growing our economy. And then for the electrification ratio, we have this target in 2019, we can achieve 96.6%. The current one, the level 81 to 84%. So, but in 2020, we want to achieve 100%. If you see our NDC now for the target 2030, 29 unconditional, and 41 we said if we get support or kind of have partnership from global community basically. But we still keep our promise pre-2020 target, the 26% emission reduction. So as a Ministry of Planning, we are very happy with the SDG momentum that agreed last year. So because this is giving very positive impact to climate change. So because we can easily or easier looking for the program or activities that generate a lot of co-benefit for development. So just an example for the renewable energy and energy efficiency, not only achieving emission reduction, but also provide electricity for all Indonesian. Not mention that this program also will give the fair and equality service for all Indonesian. So this hand in hand between NDC and SDG is very positive in Indonesia because SDG in our country really generate a lot of excitement in our people compared to climate change, and also it's create more inclusive involvement. We see a lot of philanthropists more active when SDG is agreed in September in New York. So if we see the challenge in Indonesia, our population is at least 250 million people. And then if we see the number of electrification ratio, it's mean around like 40 million people or 10 million household doesn't have electricity yet. And if we see our business as usual development of electricity using government budget, we only can achieve 1 million people per year. So if we have 40 million people still don't have electricity and we are doing business as usual, so it's take another 40 years before all Indonesians have electricity. And then if you see our geographic location, we have more than 17,000 islands. And then the one who don't have electricity now in Indonesia, most live in outer island, in small island and remote area. So that's why they don't have this electricity from our state-owned enterprise. Usually they have this transmission in bigger island or the one who have enough population. And then if we see the economic and financial situation of this location, usually renewable energy still relatively more expensive even until now. With the progress in technology in solar and in wind is still expensive compared to the conventional one, because we have the coal a lot, and then we still subsidize some of our fossil fuel. And then because this is small and medium sized project, so per kilowatt hours still more expensive compared to the big one. But even though I mentioned small, medium and size of project, but in total at least we have to develop around 3,000 megawatt. So if you develop all, become one project, is quite significant size of electricity. So the strategy, our approach is like with that kind of condition, first to give economic incentive, disincentive for the development of renewable energy in this area. Basically, we have to combine not only to produce electricity, but to generate economic to the local community. For example, in fisheries area, we have to produce the electricity to make cooling storage for the fishermen, so that later on this electricity have also economic added value to the islands or to the communities. So the objective could be like achieve a lot in terms of development. And then the second one, like I said, if we only depend on the government budget that we allocate for electricity development in Indonesia, we take 40 years, for rural electrification. So that's why it's really no option for us. We have to cooperate with private sector to develop this power plant. And then when it's talking about like small and medium size of project, of course we have to simplify the permit for the companies when they want to construct this power plant. So it's usually in Indonesia to construct new power plant takes at least 2 years from the planning before they're signing PPA. So if we see for small and medium size project, it should be less than 6 months maybe if possible. So not take as long as the big one. So, and then the fourth one we need to working on is to develop the innovative financial mechanism, because this is small and medium size. So the financing, we cannot use business as usual, because in Indonesia now the bank all since Asian crisis is commercial bank. So we don't have really a big development bank. So if they're commercial bank, they will ask high interest. So for renewable energy in remote area, so they cannot really compete if using this commercial rate. So that's why we say we have to develop innovative financing mechanism here, combined with the incentive and simplify or develop about the public-private partnership. So Indonesia so far is like the regulation for public-private partnership focus more the infrastructure and the big size one. We don't have a lot of experience in public-private partnership for small and medium size of projects. So this what we still working on to really improve this. So that's why we put like special program support for development of grid using renewable energy. We want to have two different type of program. One is connected to grid that related to our state-owned enterprise. The other one, that's the new one that we see as the breakthrough to our countries. So continuing with that challenges, so through Indonesia Climate Change Trust Fund, in addition to finance the innovative project, we also try to introduce what we call the risk insurance for green projects, like I said, because it's commercial bank with commercial interest rate. So ICETT try to find the grant money, and this grant we will buy the insurance risk for the green project that already in the pipeline of the bank. Fortunately, our bank, 8 of them voluntarily as a pilot project to finance green project. So that's maybe the first become our pilot later on. And then the other point is we provide project development facility, because in Indonesia, this is one of the biggest weakness in our country. A lot of project developer cannot really submit a good quality of proposal to the bank. So it's very difficult to bank to approve their project because it doesn't meet the bank standard. But in addition to that, the banker also already in the last 2 years get the training and capacity building how to evaluate the green project, because in the past it's more profitable for them to finance short-term loan like credit and housing credit, but not a green project because it's more difficult. More difficult is because they don't understand. So up until now, and then we call OJK, basically supervisory body for financial institution in Indonesia, is make it their regular program to give the training. And then also we try to focusing the government budget that I said that we before construction of power plant in remote area, to be more focused on the enabling activities, and we expect that most of the investment will be coming from private companies. And then this target with small and medium-sized project is very suitable actually for Indonesian situation, because most of our companies or investor is still in medium and small size capacity. And the last one, of course, we also want to improve all this reporting system to be in line what we discuss here in UNFCCC, so they can be tracked later on for the MRV and verification and so on, so on. So at national level, we develop what we call PEP online, basically monitoring and evaluation of all the national mitigation and local mitigation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is impressive, comprehensive, and just shows what do you actually do, how do you approach things when you take an NDC seriously and start to really build it in structures. I'm going to turn to my left now, first to Peter Story from PFAN, and then to Mark Fogarty, who speaks for REEEP, to see what you both see in terms of opportunities to contribute to actually get action on the ground for SMEs. Peter, can I ask you first?
Yes.
Yeah, it's.
Thank you, Martin. And thank you to Ari and to Siam Sidar for the interesting presentations to set this up. And I'll try and respond to some of the thoughts that they've perhaps brought to the table. for those that you don't, of you who don't know, PFAN is essentially a project identification and preparation mechanism. It's been operational now for 10 years. We have been supported by the Climate Technology Initiative up until recently, and we're now a project of going project development, preparation, and investment. Essentially what we do through working through a private sector network is to mobilize private sector finance into clean energy and climate change projects. Doing it for 10 years, and we're currently working on a pipeline of about 360 projects with an investment value of 8 billion. All of which is a long way to say that we know something about project development and identification. And I think that's really the key here. And Siam Sidar really put her finger on it. Ari mentioned it as well. How do we move the INDCs from being wish lists to investment plans? Because only if they become investment plans will we go into implementation. Only if we go into implementation will we get the impact we need. And we need to find a way of doing that at scale. We can't do it project by project. Obviously, we have to start at the grassroots level, but we need to really find a way of doing this in bundles of projects, tens of projects, hundreds of projects, possibly even thousands of projects at a time. And these are all things that my institution, PFAN, is also working on, and which I think provide some sort of clue and indication as to where we should be going in the future. Some of the issues out there, Siam Sidar mentioned this, we see this all the time when we're working in the countries that we work in. There are about 45 countries that we work in across the globe. The private sector, particularly the SMEs, and even more so the MSMEs that Ari mentioned, feel excluded from this process, from the climate finance negotiations, and particularly from the climate finance that's now available. And there is a tremendous amount of money out there at the moment. There is a tremendous amount of public sector money, and there's a tremendous amount of private sector money that we can use also to bring into the equation. I think it's fair to say that the SME sector across all the developing countries that we work in feels that they are not participating or not able to fully participate in accessing that money. And we need to make them accessible for the money. If we don't do that for the reasons that I think has been made very clear by Ari in his presentation, also Siam Sidar, we will not be getting the impact that we need. So this is absolutely key. What are we doing about that in PFAN? I gave you some numbers with intention earlier. It has taken us nearly 10 years to generate the pipeline that we have at the moment. So 360 projects has taken us 10 years to put together. To get to the scale that we need to be doing that in a year. We need to be doing 300 projects in a year. Why is that? If we start talking about bundling strategies, obviously one of the ways to go ahead is to say, well, let's not do this on a project by project basis. Let's start putting portfolios of projects together, and we present those portfolios of projects to the capital markets, wherever they be. We present those portfolios of projects to the GCF. We present those portfolios of projects to the CIF, or whichever other funding mechanism that we might have. But you've still got to do the project identification and preparation on a one-by-one basis. What we are doing at PFAN at the moment is working out of ways to scale our own project identification and development processes so that we can start to get to the numbers that we need and start putting those portfolios together. Coming back to the supply of money, just to give you an indication of what's available in the private sector, and you know as well as I do, or better than I do, what's available through the climate finance mechanisms, particularly the GCF, the amount of money that they've got at their disposal. But if we look at the private sector, I've been having conversations with investment banks in London, and they are very excited about the PFAN portfolio. We can give them 380 projects. Now, reality, if I'm honest, probably of those 360, 370 projects, only, let's say, 30–40% are actually going to be of interest to the financing community in London by the time we put them into a package, by the time we do all the due diligence work on them and actually get them to an investment space where the capital market, wholesale markets are going to be interested in investing. So if we achieve that, the next question of the investment bankers is, okay, I've got a portfolio of 100 projects, and that 100 projects is perhaps $300 million of investment. They want that 3 times a year. So we've got to be working with Indonesia, we've got to be working with all the other countries through the NDCs, getting these SMEs that are on the ground into the process. We've got to be working with them to develop their projects, make them investor ready, put them into the bundles, and then present them to the capital markets. Doing that in that sort of scale, 100 projects, 300 million bundles, 3 or 4 times a year. And if we don't do that, we're not at the right scale for the people in London or for the people in New York. That's what they need. Because once they get that sort of investment flow, they can tell their investors, we've got another bundle coming through from the PFAN portfolio, or from whichever portfolio it might be, from Indonesia or from a region. We've got another bundle coming through next week. That's where we've got to get to. So the ambition level has got to go right up, is my first message. Some of the ways of achieving that, I think, is to crowd in the private sector finance. We're working on an initiative in Zambia where we've actually gone to the private sector to, and this is in the off-grid sector, and rather to ask them to deliver us projects, we've said, what we want in Zambia, Zambia has a similar but actually more exacerbated situation to the one in Indonesia. We've said to them, what we want you to give us is a guarantee of providing connections. We're not interested in projects. We're not interested in your technologies. Zambia has, if I remember correctly, somewhere between 60 and 70% of its population is not connected. We've asked companies to provide us with a guarantee that over 5 years they will connect 1 million Zambians. That equates to somewhere in the region of 167,000 households. We being, in this case, REEEP, PFAN, and supported by the Swedish government, are prepared to finance that up to a certain point, and we will make the decision on how we select the people receiving the finance based on your cost per connection. And essentially what we've gone is gone out on a call for proposals. We've asked for companies, regardless of the technology, regardless of the any solution or the business model they're using, just to give us a price per connection. And of course, we've actually given them a standard of connection, and in fact, a range of standard of connections that's connected into the SE4E for all categories that you'll all be very well aware of. And we've said, what is your price of delivering those connections within a 4-year period? We got 46 applications. We're in the process of selecting 4 or 5, which we well, on the paper and the proposals they've given to us, will deliver those 1 million connections over 4 or 5 years. And that will cost the Swedish government, in this case, in the region of 15 million euros. On top of which, the private sector companies will invest from their own funding and mobilize from debt, banks, and other commercial finance, particularly sort of commercial consumer finance, somewhere in the region of between 55 to 75 million. So that's the sort of leverage that we can use to, again, crowd in the private sector. Final point, Martin, sorry, I've gone a little bit too long perhaps, but there's a lot to say, and I'm sure there'll be questions on this. I think we need to be doing this. We need to be putting these solutions together for the private sector. We need to be putting these solutions together and these packages together also for the climate finance mechanisms, so for the GCS itself. And the other role that I think the climate finance mechanism, the GCF particularly, can play is to provide, and Sim Sudar also mentioned this, and I'd be very interested to hear more about your insurance schemes, is that these climate finance mechanisms can provide risk guarantee instruments. So, you know, one of the aspects about taking small projects, even bundles of small projects that have been de-risked to the capital markets, is going to be political risk, is going to be off-taker risk, and those sort of risks can be insured. And I see that as one of the roles of the GCF in the future, providing credit risk enhancement in broadest terms in various forms to enhance the quality of the portfolios that we put together and to enable us to reach the scale that we need to meet. I'll stop there. I can talk for ages on this, as you know, but hopefully there are some ideas.
Thank you, Peter. We are actually quite proud of this project in Zambia that Peter mentioned. We're running this together. We think, we know it's high risk. This can all go awfully wrong, but it's a very innovative approach to deploying solar home systems essentially as an infrastructure measure rather than as a consumer good, which brings you into a different type of financing altogether. And we think that this is one approach to this bundling question. That's what REEP is very, very interested in. How can we actually deploy financial injection devices, financial systems that that help reach sustainably the SME level and even the micro level of the economy that is actually so vast. Mark, do you want to go into that a little bit?
Thank you, Martin. I might come at that introduction from three angles. Firstly, from REEP, and I'm not sure what introduction was given, but REEP has been around on the landscape for around about 16 odd years, a very innovative program that was introduced by the UK government that's been through a process of evolution over those 16 years, and very much core about what REEP is about SMEs. It's about intervention in the markets to ensure some market transformation for SMEs. It's about innovative financing, and it's about ensuring the ecosystems or the legal systems or legal frameworks and things support that. I might also come at that from the private sector and my opportunity to come in and out of Indonesia and observe, I think, the progress that has been well introduced to you here this morning. And thirdly, from the point of view of PFAN, I've had the benefit of being exposed to PFAN over the last 4 or 5 years, and the innovation that the PFAN model, I think, is bringing to the market. SMEs, by and large, we've already confirmed the importance of them in the climate change. Your attendance here, the well-attended side event here today, I think, confirms the interest in that. We've seen a lot of very strong reform, and if I reflect upon Indonesia, I see many things that have occurred there, particularly from the electronic commerce perspective, as they've gone about in the archipelago that Ms. Temarin has described, the 17,500 islands, 250 million people, how they've gone about promoting the importance of electronic commerce. And importantly, for a country like Indonesia, I think the gender balance very much about the women in the SME sector, which I think in Indonesia represents around about 50%. So I think some compelling reform there. The most important issue is the issue we wanted to talk here a bit about, which is the issue of how we go about promoting access to finance. And the Indonesian government hasn't been idle in how it goes about doing that. Particularly as it goes about integrating that sort of regional outcome. REEP, to come to our particular contribution, has been quite strong in 2 ways, I guess, that I'll just highlight for you this morning, and that may throw up some questions. We run pretty much annually, or by every couple of years, a call. We've had a 10th call most recently, which we're currently managing out, which has been directed very much at the SME sector, which has been very much directed at the food, energy and water sector, or components of that SME sector. So we've been looking out there for opportunities, I think, to intervene in the market that allows us to bring financing intervention to particular projects which demonstrate some sustainable energy outcomes, sustainable water outcomes, perhaps sustainable energy outcomes. We've done this, I think, with a number of smaller funds. So we've set up small funds, we've worked through intermediaries, we've worked in our own right, and we've identified SMEs who are in a position, and I think the important message today is many of the SMEs are in a position to bring the innovation to the table that we've talked about before. They've been able to bring to the table the wherewithal that they are much more, as we would call in the finance sector, bankable. They come to the table with the ability to bring equity and the ability to sustain debt. So we think that it's quite a fertile market, and we've looked at this in Cambodia. Martin and I have been talking over the last couple of days to other countries in Southeast Asia. We've looked at this in East Africa, and we're implementing it in East Africa. So the opportunity to drop in as debt grant money or concessional debt money, concessional loan money, the ability to leverage off equity that many of these small enterprises can bring to the table. That may take the form of land, that may take the form of other sorts of infrastructure. So what we're saying is that when we start to blend that up and we start to bring the banks in, that Peter's been referencing, particularly the national development banks or the regional development banks as they may exist in Indonesia, we're able to put in place the guarantees. So we've got actual working models where we're starting to deploy this. We're not the only people on this planet. There are other, I guess, public institutions that are pushing this, but we think that we've got quite a good model. And if we had a look at some of the areas, perhaps in East Indonesia, out past Lombok and out past Bali, and we see the need that's there, then I think that these sorts of funds developed up in cooperation with the Indonesian government, the banking, and bringing those important SMEs to the table produce a great contribution to the NDCs. That's probably 5 minutes worth, Martin, but I'm happy to answer some questions.
It's of course worth much more, Mark. I mean, well, it was 5 minutes. Do you want to respond a little bit to it, or shall I get into the room? Yeah. Okay. Good. I think we've seen a nice setup here. One message that I still want to make out of our REEP experience is that while, as Peter said, as Marcus said, there is a lot of money there, it isn't actually about having a lot of money. It's having the right type of money in the right place at the right time. And that can very often be quite small amounts of money, but they to trigger the right action. So it's the precision of deployment of this money rather than just talking about billions and billions and billions, which is what we all read all the time. You know, and each one of those dollars should actually make sense, each individual dollar. So let me go to the room. I'm enthusiastic about the interest here. I think there are room microphones. And I would encourage you to ask questions. Please introduce yourself and ask the questions. As I said, let's try to be succinct. There is one question here in the middle. It's not going to be a, yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm Christine. I am from Uganda, coordinating the Parliamentary Forum on Climate Change. I thank you very much for having recognized the efforts of SMEs. But the challenge we have is that they are too informal and they have issues to do with institutional development. And we would like the focus to take that route, emphasizing on institutional development of SMEs, and most of the African countries are taking them as an insecurity threat. When sometimes they organize themselves, then they become an insecurity threat. So there are issues to do with institutional development. And without that, they cannot be ready for any funding. Thank you so much.
Okay. So the question here is really about the formality and therefore the ability of SMEs to take part in a kind of more commercial process. Did I get that right? Yeah. Okay, there's another question over here. We take 2 or 3. Okay, yeah, but this gentleman was second. Yeah. Oh, but you have the, okay. Well, you start, you have a mic too. Sorry.
Thank you, thank you. Just want to inquire from Indonesian presenter. It's very quite interesting to hear about the Indonesian Climate Trust Fund, which is established to provide funds to support innovations in the SMEs. But I just wanted to understand the architecture of the trust fund, whether it is wholly government or there's also private money coming into the trust fund. And then there is a specific criteria that is set in to access these funds by the SMEs, because that's quite critical in opening up the opportunities and can also address the issues of institutional challenges that SMEs have.
Thank you. So that's the Climate Trust Fund. And there's a third question here.
Thanks, sir. It's Valentino Piana from the Economics Web Institute. We proposed several years ago to connect green technologies to microfinance. Microfinance is very strong also in Indonesia, Rakyat Bank, or many others. And I would like some comments about how to engage the microfinance world, which has already not something small, but already raised above the poverty line hundreds of millions of people. So how can we better connect to that?
Good, thank you. We'll answer those three questions and we'll go back. Is that okay? Yeah, I have noted the question over there already. The first question was about the informal SMEs. Who wants to go into that on the panel? I can. Yeah, if you then, and I will immediately add the second question, which is the question about the trust fund, and then we'll go to somebody else.
Okay, the first question is, I can respond based on our experience with ICETT. We cannot give the fund if the one who apply is not kind of institution, just individual business and so on. So usually we recommend them to use like cooperative. So they have to be, this community should form a cooperative. So on that cooperative can apply for the fund. So that's one of the solution. The other is like form a kind of as we call CSO, even though the objective is to construct the power plant in their village. So like because when we give the fund, we ask them to have bank account, and then they have to have that tax number. So then we can give the fund, even though the fund is grant. And then for the second question about the source of fund of ICETT, in the beginning is 100% is grant from other countries. But since 2014, government of Indonesia giving around $1.5 million in addition for the operation of the overhead costs like staffing, and then to finance small size project. What we call small, actually only around like $50,000, the size of the project. Bigger than that, but below 3 million. We still don't have project more than 3 million because our total amount of money from the grant now only 21 million. So, but we get every year from Indonesian government 1.5 million for the operation and for small grant project.
Thank you. Piedmont, do you want to talk a little bit about the informal sector? One of you, maybe?
I can, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, the point about the informality of the SME sector is very well taken, and it is certainly a barrier, and we see it in all the work we do in every country we work in. And that's partly the raison d'etre, if you like, of the PFAN activity. What we actually do is when we have selected a project or a project developer to work with, we assign them a coach from our network. PFAN, it's called a network, and it consists of highly specialized consultants and individuals. They're all based in country, so they're not fly-ins from Europe or America or somewhere else. They are based in the countries we work in. We have a very big consultant network actually in Uganda. We do lots of work in Uganda, just by way of example. And we would assign them one of these consultants to work with them, to hold their hands, and really help them through and walk them through the project development process, which can involve also, how do I formalize myself, in what sort of legal entity do I need to actually go ahead with this project? Should it be a company? Should it be a cooperative? Should it be a partnership? Or should it be a consortium with other people? Those are some of the areas on which we provide input, such that the project can be developed to such a stage that we can then start to show it to investors. I think the problem is it's not just the informality, that's part of the equation, but when the projects come to us in the first place, they are not ready. And that's a big concept in itself. We help them through the services that we provide to become ready, partly also addressing some of these institutional issues. Mark, anything?
Yeah.
I think that's pretty well summarised it. I mean, the examples that I've given earlier, we leverage off the back of PFAN. So, for example, in Cambodia, we're running a small fund for food, energy and water. We've just recently invested in a small vegetable production facility, which is incredibly important. And in doing that, we take this particular investee, if I can use the word, through a process of due diligence. And part of that due diligence is relying on the services of PFAN and their mentors in terms of how they may assist our agents on the ground there properly package these particular organisations. So I think the help is there, and our long-term objective is really to get to a point where the financial institutions in respective host countries can take over. So, for example, BNI in Indonesia, looking at how the frameworks could be put together to make these particular investees more formal, or in your words, or more robust in an investment sense.
And let me just link to the microfinance question, because somehow the microfinance institutions are set up to tackle some of the more informal parts of the economy. We, for instance, work with 2 companies in Kenya that are relatively young companies providing solar irrigation solutions. And we now see that the fund that Mark was talking about, one fund that we have for Kenya and Tanzania, was originally actually a concessional loan fund, but we're now going to use a part of that fund simply as a guarantee fund, as Peter said, to guarantee 100 or 200 of those water pumps in cooperation with 2 microfinance institutions, so that these microfinance institutions can, for the first time, go a little bit more courageously into lending in that place. This is a cooperative approach as well with these microfinance institutions. So I think the cooperative approach is very important. But that is one level where one really needs to hand make at the beginning. This is artisanal, this is not industrial at the beginning. One needs to create the connections so that the things can flow. And I would just like to ask a question to Ari in that context. The devil, as we all know, is in the detail. And the remedy against the devil is in preparation, which is what you were talking about. So when you listen to this discussion, where in your fast guide to the NDCs do we actually, have the means to start planning for these types of concepts?
I mean, basically, the guide and the examples are checklists of steps. So I think it's just important to not to miss any of them. I really like the question about microfinance. I think the climate finance community has perhaps not really engaged much with them. And I think there are 2 parallel universes. There's the kind of employment generation and the poverty alleviation world, and then there's the climate world. And it would be a big challenge, and I think a useful thing to do, to bring the microfinance institutions closer to the climate discussion, so that they would actually understand that they would also have a role in being instruments for climate compatible investments, either in resilient or making sure that they mainstream climate compatibility into their due diligence. I think that's something that probably hasn't happened.
So that it appears on the horizon from the beginning. Peter, do you want to come in?
I think Ari's right, but I think they're on the cusp. It's interesting, these things tend to go in waves, and we are now seeing a lot of applications coming to PFAN from the microfinance community. And they are taking this on board, and we are looking at, just to give you an idea of the sort of models that we're looking at. And obviously we're looking at providing the microfinance institutions finance so they can scale up their operations. But we're looking at a microfinance that is mainstreaming cold chain and milk production equipment for East Africa, agricultural processing, again for East Africa. What else? What is the irrigation ones in East Africa that you've also mentioned? But I think these are coming through now. And I think the nice thing, or the good thing about microfinance, is that it is an industry for itself. But if we can now bring that into the climate mainstream, then we're going, it's another battle won.
There is a certain recognition that there are between 2 and 3 billion people out there who have either no or very little money and are a huge economic potential. Everybody complains about the lack of growth, and there is growth, economic growth right ahead of us if we just kind of organize it in the right way. So I'm not quite sure why it takes so long. Let's take some more questions. There was a question here, then a question back there, and we will take another question here. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Stefan Savarez. I'm the president of Saving Our Planet, which is an NGO which advocates a fast exit track out of coal because it's the biggest threat to the climate and also for the health of people. So in order to replace coal with clean energy, we did 3 things. One is issue a petition, which is named Exit Coal Now, and which I invite you to sign. The second thing is that we devised a climate course, which is taught in several countries in order to teach people what the dangers of coal are and how it can be replaced. And the third thing is that we found companies, small companies, SMEs, that have developed the technology to replace coal with biomass and clean energy. So my question is, will you be willing to help those companies build more plants? And what are you looking in terms of criteria to select this kind of project?
Thank you. There's a question back there.
I'm René Esterman from my Climate Foundation, engaged in carbon finance and climate finance projects as well in Indonesia. And I have the question to the Indonesian lady about fossil fuel subsidies. Because in the past, fossil fuel subsidies, Indonesia was famous, and in many of our projects, biogas projects, biodiesel projects, hydro projects, composting projects, we faced these fossil fuel subsidies in Indonesia as a killer in the project development. How is the situation actually and in the future about the fossil fuel subsidies in Indonesia?
Good, thank you. And there was a third question up front here.
My name is Hadley Walimwipi. I'm from Zambia. I'm managing a project on low emissions capacity building project. I have 2 questions for Mr. Sture. The first one is the project that you're implementing. Is it done in the context of NDC or climate change connections? Does it have any link or connection to climate change? Or it is just about increasing access? And then the second one is, are you going to evacuate power from the main grid to electrify? Or you're going to use solar PV or any other technologies?
Thank you. I think shall I turn to you again first about the subsidy questions? It's never a great question to get for anybody on a panel, actually, but I know you will answer it very well.
I already have a good answer for that because people keep asking about that question. So in the past, yes, almost like $30 billion we spent for the subsidy, but now for electricity, only 450 what household that get subsidy. The more than that, they don't get subsidy anymore. And the one who can like even decided to take out the subsidy for this electricity is just PLN, the state-owned enterprise. It doesn't need president decree like in the past, because in the past it's like need a presidential decree to determine how much the tariff for each type of customer in Indonesia. So it's just the other type of customer is already basically commercial price. Only the basically poor household that get the subsidy. So our subsidy is reduced a lot. And then for the fuel, the good quality fuel that low emission doesn't have any subsidy. Usually the one who have like fancy car, they not allowed to buy subsidized fuel. But with the oil price decrease, we don't subsidize our fuel anymore. I hope the price is always low. Because it's already low and drop. So our government doesn't give any subsidy. The price is already acceptable. So only our worry is if all of a sudden oil price increase, like before more than $100, then we'll make a difference. And then in addition, the current government is emphasized on development of infrastructure. So it's like no option anymore for Indonesia to spend too much money on the subsidy, because we have to construct the infrastructure. Basically, that's the answer now.
So the same money that was going into subsidies is now actually reallocated to infrastructure.
I just might come at that as well, maybe from the private sector's perspective, as someone who's a proponent seeking to put projects in place in Indonesia. I think that was an excellent answer, and I think if, you know, for someone, I'm on the ground, I'll be on the ground there again next week and the week after. When you look at, I think the reform process that the Jokowi government, presidential government has brought in has been quite compelling. I mean, a 17% reduction in the subsidy, certainly in the first 12 months. And then you look at examples of that in action. So the solarization of Indonesia is now well and truly moving forward. And you look at the archipelago from east to west, and I think the policy settings that are put in place that clearly provide opportunity for feed-in on rooftop or ground-mounted solar systems, I think confirms the answer that Ms. Tamarin gave. There's still some gap there, but that gap has been picked up through subsidization funds and things. And over time, I think you'll see Indonesia is probably one of the excellent examples in Southeast Asia where that subsidy has been eradicated altogether. So
exactly, yeah. So it was an easy question for you, actually. There were two questions directed to you, Peter, but let me just say one thing about the NDC link when you talk about energy access in general and in Zambia. I think what I believe we need to look at much more is the threat of future emissions. And in your side event 2 days ago, which was a fascinating side event, the Ghana-Zambia side event, you were talking very clearly about the need to provide more electricity in Zambia and what kind of different tools you are actually deploying in Zambia. You were also, if I remember, it was you or a colleague of yours talking about the potential of using coal for that, which is of course from an pure energy point of view understandable when you want to fill the energy gap, but at the same time we all know it's a real problem. So if we look at the deployment of new technologies, clean technologies, even off-grid technologies at a large scale, therefore having a mass impact, we actually are avoiding future emissions, or better said, we immediately moving into more modern technologies. And I think that's what NDCs in general should actually be about, that they basically plan a development towards leapfrogging and towards the most modern and most up-to-date technology deployment. That's where I come from. Peter, I'll hand over to you.
Okay. So I'll leave the NDC aspect because I think you've addressed that. The principal driving factor for the activity in Zambia is access. But I think Martin's points are very valid. In terms of the technologies, as I mentioned, we really left that completely open. However, I mean, it wasn't excluded, but we weren't certainly expecting to receive any proposals with a grid solution. It wouldn't have been excluded, but I think it would have been very, very difficult to get that into a sort of a commercial operation mode under the way we had formulated the request for proposals. We received proposals from DESCOs, so distributed energy service companies, distributing lanterns, solar home systems, operating pay-as-you-go models and various lease-to-own models, that sort of things. We received proposals from mini-grid operators as well, using various technologies again. And it wasn't the technology that was driving us. What we wanted was the solution. And I think that's hopefully what we're going to get. But, you know, come back next year and we'll be able to share some results with you, hopefully. If I turn to the question of eligibility, PFAN certainly is completely open source. We are technology neutral. Excuse me, I'll move the microphone. We're technology neutral. So we can work with any technology from any country as long as it works and does what it's supposed to do in that particular application. Other eligibility criteria, essentially, we need to see GHG reduction and other climate benefits. We need to see that the project or the company is sustainably, economically, commercially viable, if you like. We look for other SDG benefits. We look for strong management, and we look for growth potential. And you know, I think those are all of the aspects that you would expect to see in terms of raising finance. We are open. I always say this a little bit hubristically, we're open 24/7. You can send a proposal to us at any time. There are applications and guidelines for doing that on our website. And we also run cyclical or periodical call for proposals, usually on a regional or a country basis. And there is a current call out for West Africa, which is open until the 14th of December. But you can approach us, we're open and we'd be pleased to look at whatever you've got.
Can we go into one more round? Yeah? Okay, we go into one more round of questions. There are two questions over there, Katja. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jessica Dator Versiria. I work for Christian Aid for Asia, working in the Asia and Middle East. My question is that many of you said there's a lot of money going around. Just on our core goals, let's say of making sure that there's net zero carbon by 2050, do we really have that money? I mean, just a straightforward question.
Hello, my name is Rebecca Davidson. I'm with the Vermont Law School delegation. I'm right over here. Sorry. And so my question is, I would just like to understand a little bit more about the connection. You mentioned about the NDCs, but really about the connection with getting finance to the countries who are responsible for implementing the NDCs and what the linkage is with the SMEs. So understanding how that tiered process might work.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Sonja Schönbeck. I'm working for the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung in Vietnam, a country that is probably also very ambitious and interesting, attracting more funding from its own strong SME sector. So I wanted to ask Peter from PFAN about how exactly the bundling is done. Is a government already suggesting a bundle of projects? Or are you looking for projects that might be put in a bundle from across the world and then put together a portfolio? How does it work?
Okay. I'll hand over to Peter in a moment. Does this work? Actually, I'm never quite sure if one hears me. I think one hears me when one shouldn't, and then probably not the other way around. The bundling question is one that actually everybody on this panel is addressing, right? From the important preparation to the impressive set of tools and agencies that you're putting together to exactly do that kind of thing in Indonesia, to Peter with PFAN, to Mark with REEEP. Everybody of us is working on that because it is so important. So I'll put that to you, Peter, but I will first ask you another question which came up. Do we actually have enough money?
Yeah, I can see Martin's enjoying this.
Yeah, I love to be moderator because I don't have to answer.
Well, I think the sort of slightly facetious answer to that would be how much is enough? How long is a piece of string? I personally don't have any concern about the supply of money, whether it be supply of money from the private sector or the public sector. It's not about the availability. The problem is, and it comes to the same thing, unfortunately, is mobilizing it. And moving money, as we all know, costs time and effort. And that's what we're really talking about. And all of the money that we're talking about moving has different conditions attached to it. And if we're talking about public money, there are a certain set of conditions. If we're talking about private money, there are another set of conditions. And I think what we're all grappling at the moment with these two, and even just to generalize that way is wrong, but with these two generic pots of money, public and private, which even then have lots of subsections, how do we bring them together such that they're integrated and coordinated, and that we're optimizing our resources and not using them in a suboptimal way? That's really what we're grappling with. And it's about moving the money and about the people resources to move that money. And that's where I have my concern, if I'm really honest, because if I look at the PFAN network, which consists of somewhere in the region of, I don't know, 160 specialists that all have an expertise in moving money from an investor into a project. They've all done it, and they're all doing it constantly. They're doing it for PFAN, and they're doing it for themselves, and they're doing it for other organizations. But there's not enough of them. Yeah, it's not because the money isn't there, it's because we can't move that money fast enough, and that's a people problem. And that's where all of the training and the capacity building activities, from whether it's in country, developing country, whether it's from outside, from the donor countries, is so important, because without that capacity building, we won't be able to move the money at the rate and within the amounts that we need, and quickly enough, certainly. But the money is there. If you're talking about the dollars in the bank, they're there. But how do we move it? That's a different question. I hope I sort of answered that.
I think you did that. You bundled your answer actually around 3 questions in a way. That's good bundling. We can actually go into another round of questions if you want.
Can I answer the bundling? The other bundling?
Oh, do you want the other bundling question? Yes, sorry, Peter.
Unless,
yeah.
I don't know whether in the other panelists. The question from Vietnam about how is bundling done. If I knew that, I probably wouldn't be sitting here. We're right at the beginning of this process. I think everybody's been talking about it for some time. I think it's the way that we all want to go. And there are some efforts. I mean, PFAN is doing things, other organizations are doing things. And I don't think there's going to be one way of doing this. Our particular approach is, well, I think we're going to have 2 ways of tackling this. Firstly, we're going to trawl our existing pipeline. So the 360 odd projects that I mentioned earlier, we're going to go into that pipeline. We know they're there. We know those projects. We can work with them today. We're going to select some of those and start putting them into bundles that we think would be interesting to investors. And we're going to be receiving advice from the investment banking community as to how we structure those bundles and what sort of credit enhancement we need to be able to make them interesting for the wholesale investors that are out there. As we move forward, our vision at PFAN is certainly that we start sourcing our projects in bundles, if you like, so that when we go out with a call for proposals, that call for proposals is structured such that we create the bundle but through the selection process. Now, you still have to do it to a certain extent one by one, but the more that we can sort of systemize and streamline our sourcing, the better we can streamline and systemize the distribution. And it's trying, I think doing the distribution is relatively easy. It's how do we do the sourcing at scale and systemized and in a unified way to be able to feed into the demand that's there. That's the real question.
And I would like to turn to you, Siamsita because you've installed that trust fund, you have installed the structures. How does it look like from your side?
But we are still working with the small size project like ICETT. So the project, especially the one who's like quite far from Jakarta, if even though it's small, if too small, we cannot finance because the cost of transportation just to see that project will be too expensive. You know, that's why we ask the project is like maybe they have to bundle several activities in the same like island or region. But for the like infrastructure one, like the power plant, is still the idea is not really implemented yet. It's not about the idea. People not agree that maybe it's become more attractive for private company if there is like several project bundle in one packet when we procure. But also the issue of procurement, because procurement is become very sensitive. How you give the price or you evaluate this fair the fair tariff you given to the project developer. So in Indonesia is still a big problem to solve about how to use how you to show the procurement process is transparent, fair, and like justifiable with the given price by the government or by PLN, the state-owned enterprise.
Thank you. We can do last two questions so that we end on time. I know how much is going on. There's a question here and a question behind there.
Hi there. I'm Laura Zizzo, a lawyer and consultant in Canada. Really interested in the comment, Peter, about less than half of the product being attractive to the capital markets and why that would be. And I know we've probably touched on many of the reasons, but if you could give us a list, because we're finding the same thing of investors in Canada. They want to get more involved in this space, but it's not big enough. It's not robust enough. So is that the general theme, or are there other kind of tools that we can address?
Hi, I'm Swati Agarwal and I'm from India. I work with TERI, the Energy and Resources Institute. So my question is that since we are talking about mobilizing finance into the SME sector, so what role do you see for the environment and social guidelines, the ESG rules within the banking system to really help in mobilizing climate finance further into the SMEs?
Good. Peter, the first question was to you. Can you do the guideline?
Well, so I didn't hear it.
Yeah.
You can interpret.
Okay.
Okay.
Peter?
The 50% of projects, the concern. Let me first sort of try to drill down a little bit. I don't think I was trying to say, and I hope I didn't raise the impression I might have done, that the other 50% are not investable. I was just really saying they're probably not going to be of suitable investment quality for the wholesale capital markets. If we look at the current PFAN portfolio, as I say, it's 360 odd projects, and only some of those are really going to be suitable for putting into these bundles for being sold on to wholesale investors who are not interested with the nuts and bolts of the project development, if you like. The way PFAN has worked in the past, and we didn't get time to cover, is this: we've done the distribution on a one-by-one basis, which is very time-intensive and laborious. We've been successful at that. That's how we've raised the money we've raised to date, and we will continue doing that. Now, across the whole portfolio, our target is to raise money for something like 40% of the projects that we work with. To give you an idea of the fallout, the bigger fallout rate, to get to the 300 odd projects or 360 odd projects that we are working with currently or have gone through the process, we've probably looked at 3,000, probably more than that. And it is this process is like a big filter. You start with a lot of projects at the top, you narrow you down, and only a limited amount are unfortunately going to get private sector finance. We'd love to have the situation where we would get 100%, but that's not going to be reality. If you look at venture capital models, private equity models, they all work on similar sort of equations where they look at a lot of projects and they end up financing relatively few. Although it might seem low to you, the 40% rate that we have set ourselves and that we're pretty much hit, we sort of go between a range of 30 to 40, depending on how you calculate and when you calculate, and whether you do it on an aggregated basis or on a funding stream basis. But that rate is very high compared with venture capital models, for instance, as you will know.
Good. The social and environmental guidelines. We're a little bit at odds with this question. You kind of taking us aback. I'm not sure if anybody can answer that. Ari, can you talk about these banking guidelines?
More generally, I would say, in my experience, for instance, with working with the banking community in Indonesia, and what worked was in the end a trusted relationship between the client and the bank. And guidelines or not, I mean, that to me was the bottom line, is that there is a good project. It doesn't have to have a high profit margin as long as it's reliable and it's understood by both parties. And I think that to me is the bottom line. And I think that's where very much, I think the bigger challenge for this room and everybody is the money is probably there. There is money, but it's not flowing there where we want it to flow in a way we would like, into types of investment we would like it to flow to. And that gap needs to be bridged. And to me, by far the most important support that can be provided has been explained very well by Peter, and it's development, project development. It's really how you actually bridge the gap between the misunderstandings between the source of capital and the client, and then de-risking those bits, not cash transfers, but actually guarantees and insurance schemes that might actually lower the risk to the source of finance. So that to me is probably the biggest, the fastest way to go in. But of course, we need the guidelines. We need to have order in the financial system.
Good. That is at the same time a very big wish to have order in the financial system. But it's certainly a very, very good conclusion from you, Ari, for the panel. I think we'll leave it at that. We were not setting out to solve all the problems in these 1.5 hours, but we definitely know not only that there are problems, but that there is very serious and very concrete work on finding solutions that at the national level, as much as in the level of organizations that work internationally and governments that are funding that. Let me just at the very end say thank you very much to my panel. It's great to be allowed to moderate you here. It's a very easy thing to do with you all in the panel. I would thank you all for attending, being interested, and keeping in touch in this extremely important subject. If you want more of this type of thing, you might be interested in the side event tomorrow at 14 hours in the Africa Pavilion, where again, you will see, unfortunately, Peter and myself on a panel, but don't be worried. There will be a few other people too. And we will talk about PFAN a little bit more. PFAN is a network of finance advisors who are all really in the market, and they need an institutional platform, which recently has changed towards a partnership between my own organization, REEEP, and UNIDO, the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. And we'll all be there, and we'll tell you what our plans are, how we're going to move forward, how we're actually scaling PFAN, because we don't just scale the companies and the markets that we're looking at. We want to scale the tools that we're working with at the same time to scale even more. That's tomorrow in the Africa Pavilion at 2 o'clock. Thank you very much, and have a great afternoon.